Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Icon. My name is Richard Santana. I'm the managing partner of Colectivo 360, a real estate consulting firm in Puerto Rico. Today we'll be speaking with one of the few economists that accurately predicted the financial crisis of 2008. With over 20 years of experience in finance, in 2010 he founded Euro Pacific Asset Management and then moved his company to Puerto Rico in 2013. We are honored to have with us today the CEO and Global Strategist of Euro Pacific Capital, Peter Schiff. Peter, it's an honor to have you on Icon.
Oh, thanks for stopping by.
Thank
Honored
you.
to be here.
You have an amazing house here, so kudos to you and your wife. It's really lovely what you've done here. Give us a little bit of your background as far as investment and what your company does.
Well, I've been in the investment business pretty much my entire life. So I really started out in the brokerage industry, but I branched out into asset management and banking. In fact, the two businesses that I've moved here to Puerto Rico, one is an asset management company, Euro Pacific Asset Management.
Okay.
We manage a fund family, a mutual fund family, and we also manage separate accounts for individual investors. I started that kind of as a branch initially of my broker-dealer, Euro Pacific Capital, but ultimately moved the asset management company here. And I also have a bank, Euro Pacific Bank, which was out in St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, which in 2017 I relocated here to Puerto Rico. So I now have two businesses in the financial services industry operating out of Puerto Rico.
How did you end up in Puerto Rico? Why do you move down here? Aside from the great weather.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got earthquakes and hurricanes, but apart from that, it's usually pretty warm and pretty sunny. But no, there are some very favorable tax incentives that really put Puerto Rico on my radar. I never would have even thought about it, but for the tax incentives. And I was already, before I moved my asset management company here to Puerto Rico, I was already looking at places like Singapore and Ireland to relocate that business to be much more tax efficient than where I had it. It started out in Southern California. But I initially found out about Puerto Rico simply by reading an article, I think it was on Bloomberg, about John Paulson and some of the things that he was doing down here, developing real estate. And I found out about the tax incentives, and then I looked into it, and it was a great deal. And personally too, I was thinking about moving from New England, I'm living up in Connecticut, down to Florida, because in addition to not having a state income tax, it's much nicer weather during the winter times. I figured I would just, spend my summers up in Connecticut and spend the rest of the year down in Florida, and then also enjoy the benefits of no state income tax. But Puerto Rico offers, a much bigger tax benefit in that you don't have any federal income taxes when you come down here. So if you operate a business in Puerto Rico, any profits that that business derives are not subject to the federal income tax or the Obamacare tax. And so by moving down here, I effectively double my income because I pay a 4% corporate tax, but then I don't pay a tax on the distributions that the corporation pays in dividends to me or other shareholders. There is no other local tax that Puerto Rico adds. So it's basically a 4% tax on the money that you're earning operating a business. And then you pay no personal capital gains taxes. So to the extent that you invest the money that you earn and only pay 4% tax on, if you earn additional profits, you pay no tax. So it's a great deal. It makes it a lot more, a lot easier to operate a business because you're not splitting the profits with the government. And it also gives you a lot of extra cash to reinvest in growing your business and expanding it and hiring more people. So it's a very good place right now to do business.
To our audience that have been thinking about or heard about running a business from Puerto Rico, from your perspective, what has been your experience of running your operations down from the island?
Well, it's not that difficult. I mean, not everything works quite as good. I was doing an interview, I think 2 days ago, at my studio, at my office, and as soon as we went to do the interview, the Liberty internet went down and they had to call it off. So a lot of the things are not as reliable, whether it's your internet connection or the power going off a lot. But you can still make do. I mean, we have generators and other ways to cope with that. But yeah, so the infrastructure is not quite what you would get, in the States. So there are some inconveniences that you put up with, but clearly those inconveniences are more than offset by the benefits of not having the taxes.
It's just a trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not as many direct flights from San Juan. It's harder to get to the West Coast.
That is true.
You're gonna have to connect unless you have your own plane. But you've got a lot of flights to the Northeast, in even parts of the Midwest and Texas and the South. So and the airport is close, so it's convenient.
I know you're very outspoken about politics. Also, of course, I follow your podcast, so I'm a big fan of you.
Thank
you.
you.
I want to touch upon what are the political effects to our economy based on the projected outcome of next year's election. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Puerto Rico could be a major beneficiary of the election, especially if it goes, to the Democrats. If Bernie Sanders or somebody like that were to become president, the taxes in the U.S. are going to go up substantially. So that is going to create an even more powerful incentive to avoid those taxes by moving to Puerto Rico. As I said, my income is basically doubled because I live in Puerto Rico. But if they raise the marginal tax rate, people could effectively triple their income by moving to Puerto Rico. So the more expensive they make it to stay in the U.S., the more attractive they make it to relocate to Puerto Rico. So that could be a beneficiary. But I do think, though, the U.S. economy is headed for a recession. It's going to be a very severe recession. It's probably going to be worse than what we now call the Great Recession. So obviously that is going to impact Puerto Rico as well in a negative way. But Puerto Rico is in a unique position to actually do well during a recession if enough businesses relocate to the island in order to avoid the higher levels of taxation that are being imposed on the mainland. So as long as Puerto Rico doesn't really shoot itself in the foot, it could do really well.
To that effect, I work in real estate, and most of my clients are Act 22 companies looking to relocate. And that has been my experience. Like real estate in Condado, Old San Juan, Santurce, particular areas have substantially gone up in price in the last couple of years, and it's because of that. So what you're saying, it's a natural that.
Yeah, well, I moved here from Connecticut, and since I've lived here, the value of my Connecticut home, the real estate, has just gone straight down. It just continues to lose value every year, whereas the property that I own here in Puerto Rico has gone up quite a bit. So you can see people are moving into Puerto Rico and bidding up property prices. They're moving out of Connecticut, and so that's depressing prices because people are trying to leave and they're putting their house on the market, but you don't have people to buy. But one thing that really frustrates me sometimes, though I think it's probably more just politics, but is the constant push for Puerto Rico statehood. As
right.
if the reason that Puerto Rico's in trouble is because we're not a state, and if we were only a state, well then we would be doing so much better. And that's completely wrong. In fact, the best thing that Puerto Rico has going for it is that it's not a state. And if Puerto Rico was a state, the problems would be even worse. First of all, right, the U.S. government, the national debt is like $23 trillion. And that's just the tip of the iceberg because it doesn't count all the unfunded liabilities. Why would Puerto Rico want to become a state and assume its share of that debt?
That's correct.
Because as much debt as Puerto Rico has, even on a per capita basis, the U.S. has more.
Sure.
Even if you adjust it for the higher incomes in the U.S. and Puerto Rico. The United States is much more heavily in debt than Puerto Rico. So Puerto Ricans would compound their debt problem by joining the United States. But the other main negative about becoming a state is then Puerto Ricans would be subject to the federal income tax. And as somebody who has been subject to that tax, that you don't want that. You don't want IRS agents descending on Puerto Rico. That's not how to, invigorate the Puerto Rican economy, is to infest it with IRS agents. And if you think about, Puerto Rico already has a 33% income tax for, Puerto Rican residents earning income here. That's higher than any state income tax. If you had to pay a 40% federal tax and a 33% Puerto Rico tax, which is no longer deductible against your federal tax, and then what if you had to pay the 15% self-employment tax? You could have people in an 85% tax bracket. Nobody's going to work for 15 cents on the dollar. And even if you get through the portion of your income that would be subject to the payroll tax, I mean, 70% marginal tax rate is a killer. So if Puerto Rico became a state, it would literally just be a welfare state, because we would drive everybody out of business, because nobody could survive that type of taxation. But the fact that Puerto Rico is not a state gives it a unique advantage over every state, because businesses that operate here are at a competitive advantage in that they don't have to pay so much taxes. So they have more money to grow and invest, and expand their businesses. So this island could really be, kind of like the Singapore of this hemisphere, by taking advantage of the low taxes that we have. I mean, for years and years, Puerto Rico, didn't do that. They just imposed their own high levels of taxation, but they had, the ability to do the opposite, and they're doing that now. I mean, and the island is already benefiting substantially from the inflow of capital and entrepreneurs that has taken place over the last 5 or 6 years.
So to your point, touching upon people that are relocating to Puerto Rico, I think one of the misnomers is that Act 2022 is not necessarily only for Americans. I mean, stateside Americans. It's both for the diaspora, or in case of Act 20, people that want to export services from Puerto Rico to the States. But what's interesting is that it was a statehood party that proposed the Act 2022 legislation, which are in favor of statehood, which, as you just mentioned, that's not necessarily...
yeah, I mean, statehood would put an end to it. Because if Puerto Rico was a state, then all the income would then be subject to tax. But the reason that Puerto Rico is so good for Americans is because people who live in other countries, let's say Canadians, for example, they can go to any Caribbean island. They can go to the Bahamas, they can go to the Grand Caymans, where they have no income taxes and pay no tax, because Canada does not tax your worldwide income. America is very unique in that type of taxation. So Americans really don't have a lot of choices. Puerto Rico is really the only game in town for people with U.S. citizenship. But the acts don't just benefit people who have moved here. I mean, people who have lived their entire lives in Puerto Rico, anybody that works for an Act 20 company, to the extent that they receive a dividend from that company, it is tax-free. So you don't have to come here from the U.S. to enjoy these benefits. You could have been born and raised here and still enjoy these benefits, if you structure your company the right way, or if you work for somebody. We have local, we've hired employees from Puerto Rico, and they're able to take advantage of these benefits.
Any chance, what are your thoughts on, because I agree with you that under statehood, it will be a challenge to keep the existing tax incentives. Do you believe there's any chance that Congress might give a waiver for Puerto Rico if it became a statehood?
Well, I don't know, what the procedure would be. It's been a long time since we added a state. I mean, the last, I think, was in the, 40-something with Alaska and Hawaii. But I think there would have to be some type of transition period before the Puerto Rican economy could handle the federal income tax, because what would have to happen would be the local government would have to get much smaller so that Puerto Ricans can afford to pay for both the local government in San Juan and then for the government in Washington, D.C. So, I guess right now there's no way that can happen because it's so expensive to maintain the Puerto Rican government. But what would really help Puerto Rico would not to become a state and to now have to deal with even more government. What would really help Puerto Rico is to shrink the size of the local government. We need less government here in San Juan, not more government coming from Washington, D.C. So if we can focus on making government smaller and freeing up more resources to the private sector and reducing taxes even further. I mean, my taxes are fine. They're about as low as they're going to get, but there are a lot of other, people that are working in Puerto Rico that aren't exporting services, that are just generating, locally sourced income, that are paying a 33% tax. Why not bring that tax down? But the way to bring that tax down is to make government smaller and less expensive.
So you just touched upon Bernie Sanders a couple of minutes ago. Do you think it's for Puerto Rico's economy? Do you think it's better to have a Democratic in power instead of a Republican? Well,
only to the extent that the Democrats will make the economy that much worse on the mainland. So if you think that that's what's going to benefit Puerto Rico
by default,
but I mean, ideally, we would all benefit from good government, which would be smaller government, fewer regulations, lower taxes. But we're not getting that. I mean, even from the Trump administration, as much as they want to talk about, the progress that has been made, they haven't. All they've done is made government bigger. The deficits are bigger. They've cut taxes a bit, but at the expense of larger deficits. So we're borrowing to pay for bigger government instead of taxing to pay for bigger government. But the bottom line is it's the bigger government that is undermining real economic growth and rising living standards. So I don't know that Puerto Rico is necessarily better off, when America becomes socialist or more socialistic. But there will certainly be a big influx of people trying to escape that confiscatory taxation, and they'll be coming down here to Puerto Rico. So that would really be a benefit. But you never know. I mean, the Democrats, again, they're the ones that are really pushing statehood and making Puerto Rico a state. And I know that some of these Democrats, like Ocasio-Cortez and some of her buddies, authored a letter that they sent to the Secretary of the Treasury, trying to get them to put pressure on Puerto Rico to get rid of Acts 2022, which have actually now been modified into Act 60. But they tried to argue, or Cortez tried to argue in her letter to Mnuchin, that Puerto Rico was hurting, that this was actually bad for Puerto Rico, which clearly it is not. I mean, Puerto Rico is generating a lot of extra tax revenue from all the businesses that have relocated to Puerto Rico. I mean, I still pay a lot of taxes personally, even if my rate is low. They're still getting a lot of money. They wouldn't have gotten any of that money had I not moved here. But they collect taxes from my employees, and there's a lot of other economic activity that takes place as a result of my being here. Either it's money that I'm spending myself or money that employees are spending, and local businesses are benefiting from the fact that I'm here. And so there's a lot of net benefits, not only to the Puerto Rican economy, is basically with economic activity, but the government is generating additional tax revenue from this economic activity. So it's clearly a win for Puerto Rico. Now, yes, you could argue it's a loss for the U.S. because I'm paying a lot less taxes to the federal government than I used to pay. I'm paying more to Puerto Rico, but I'm paying less to the U.S. government. But the question is, had Puerto Rico not adopted this program to help itself, what might that have cost the federal government in extra aid? That it's not having to send to Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is helping itself through businesses coming here and expanding and hiring people.
To that extent, I think in part this is what for the audience, part of what we're trying to do with ICON, it's position Puerto Rico from a global perspective. And the reality is that tax incentives are not unique to Puerto Rico. There's a reason why companies go around the world and just move around income. So to that effect, if Puerto Rico wants to compete at that level and attract companies, there has to be a robust tax system. If not, they're going to stay stay in the United States or look elsewhere where they're going to pay lower taxes.
Oh yeah, I mean it's very competitive, but at least the United States, to the extent that a company is going to relocate outside the United States, they may as well relocate to Puerto Rico.
Right.
I mean, it should be better for that, and that's why I said my asset management company was going to leave the U.S. I had already made that decision that I wanted to be in a friendlier tax environment. It certainly is better from the United States that I chose Puerto Rico as opposed to Ireland or Singapore, right? Because this is an American colony and the people who live here are American citizens. So it's probably better that my business be here, with employing American citizens than Irish citizens. Right? So, we need to have our own tax haven. Otherwise, it's all going to be the offshore tax havens. Now, ideally, the United States should be a tax haven. We should get rid of the income tax for everybody. But that's just not going to happen. Right? I mean, so to the extent that we're never going to do that, at least having a little island of prosperity makes sense. If it, our island.
And I agree with you. There's so much offshore investment, and I think that's where the opportunity is. And we have to find a way that Puerto Rico can position itself. Because it's better to have it in Puerto Rico because of the relation we have to the United States. So I think that's something that, for whatever reason, it hasn't been. That's something we should look upon. Because another companies are going to stay offshore. So
right, and it's not just the United States. I mean, Puerto Rico can engage in commerce all over the world. I mean, it could be in Europe, it could be in Asia. Yes, a lot of the Americans that are moving here are coming here and they're moving businesses that generally were Americans were the customers. But I think once businesses relocate here, they can really focus on expanding globally and tapping into other markets because they are in a more efficient position now to do that. And if we do get a sharp turn to the left in the United States and we get a much weaker U.S. economy because we make government a lot bigger, then a lot of the companies that moved here are going to see a lot of their U.S. sourced income drying up as the U.S. economy moves into recession or deeper recession. But that could open up other opportunities to try to just generate revenue from Asia, for example, where economic activity could be picking up. I mean, their economies can be booming as the U.S. economy is busting. And so Puerto Rico or Puerto Rican businesses have the opportunity to engage where the economic growth is.
I don't know if you noticed that Michael Bloomberg started his campaign in Puerto Rico. He's been very aggressive in the media.
Yes, yes.
Any thoughts on him as a candidate and how, if he won, how do you perceive his impact on Puerto Rico?
Well, again, he just put out an op-ed just the other day where he came out in favor of statehood for Puerto Rico, where again, he thinks that, being a state is just a panacea, that somehow if we could just have congressmen or senators, that's going to benefit Puerto Rico by getting more government resources into Puerto Rico, right? That we don't lobby enough for government money, but that's not what grows an economy. We want private enterprise,
correct,
right? And so the absence of the IRS, a lower tax rate, that is much better for economic growth than having politicians who can try to get more government money redirected back into government programs in Puerto Rico. That is not what is going to grow the Puerto Rican economy. I mean, I lived in Connecticut. I had congressional representation, right? I left that, right? In fact, my congressman didn't represent me at all. I didn't vote for any of the guys that won, right? And even though I'm down here, sure, I can't vote for president anymore, right? I mean, I could vote in the primary, in theory, but I can't vote in the general election. But who cares? Because, I usually vote for the loser. And, the whole purpose of voting, right? You're trying to get back some of the money that you send to Washington. Well, if we're not sending anybody to Washington, then we don't have to beg to get some of it back, right? So I would rather, let the people in the 50 states, fight over those crumbs. We don't need those crumbs, right? We could just, keep all of our money and not have to lobby Congress to get some of it back. So we don't need congressional representation. We don't need senators. We're fine as long as we're not on the hook to pay for all the programs that everybody else's congressmen are voting for, right? We're not obligated to fund that. So becoming a state, the way Bloomberg envisions it, that would just take the problems in Puerto Rico and make them a lot worse. We need to exploit the fact that we're not a state. And in fact, every single state in the union, if it had a choice, it would switch places with Puerto Rico in a heartbeat.
That's ironic, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no state that wouldn't give up 2 senators and their representatives to get rid of the income tax. No federal income tax. I mean, and then, when the way they try to market statehood here, they basically tell people that if we were only a state, we could get more welfare, right? Your welfare benefits would be higher. Is that what we want? We want to be a state so we can have more welfare? I'd rather be a colony and have more freedom.
Or we
have way more freedom now.
Or we can have statehood with more tools instead of asking for help. That's one.
But statehood means you have less tools. Statehood means that you're on the hook for your share of the national debt,
sure,
and we immediately have to start paying federal income taxes. We're now subject to audits. I mean, do you think IRS agents make you more productive? No, they don't. It's the fact that we don't have to deal with the IRS. That's the key to productivity. That's the comparative advantage that Puerto Rico has. I mean, if Puerto Rico had been exploiting its ability, to eliminate the federal tax, if they had started this not in 2013, but 40 or 50 years ago, I mean, this place would be booming by now. You wouldn't even recognize it. It would be by far, right now, Puerto Rico is per capita poorer than any state in the United States.
Right.
In fact, I think it's half the poorest state. But had they been pursuing these policies for 50 years, we would probably be twice as rich as the richest state. So we just got to, continue on this path. And as far as the federal the government on the island, what they need to do is just start privatizing, just starting to get smaller and find ways to turn over a lot of the functions that the government has been operating into private hands, private enterprise, so that they can make them efficient. I mean, the Puerto Rican government is extremely inefficient, which is not anything unique to Puerto Rico. All governments are inefficient.
Correct.
That's why you don't want government doing things. You want the free market to do things because they will be efficient. They will control the costs and continuously improve the quality, the opposite of what government does.
So to our audience that has been thinking about relocating to Puerto Rico, some general thoughts of what should they look at or consider before relocating to Puerto Rico?
Oh, we love living here. I mean, it's a great place to live. I mean, forget about the tax incentives. I mean, the tax incentives make it possible to, live here and still maintain, your other home if you want to do that. I mean, I still have my house in Connecticut and we go back there. Now, there are some people that completely cut ties to the States and they move here. But if you want to kind of hold on to some of that, the fact that you're not paying taxes makes it a lot easier because now you have a lot more income to cover the extra expenses and the extra travel. But as far as just living here, as far as the lifestyle of Puerto Rico, I mean, I like it quite a bit. I mean, my wife loves it down here. She says she thinks it's the best decision that I've made, moving to Puerto Rico. The kids love it here. They go to a great school. They'll probably end up getting into a much better college than what they would get into if they were in school in the States, because you do have a bit of an advantage applying to college from Puerto Rico, or not a bit, a very strong advantage coming from here. But the quality education here in the private schools is good. The cost is relatively low compared to what people pay for private schools, where I moved here from. But no, it's just a good quality of life. The weather is beautiful. If you like doing things outdoors, you could do things year round. I mean, if you like the water, I mean, the ocean here is incredible. You can, play golf, you can play tennis, you can go kite surfing. I mean, there's a lot of activities that kids, there's so many little kids here. So it's a great place to grow up. I spend more time in my golf cart than in an actual car. So people are worried that they, I hear that a lot, that, sure, you hardly have to pay any taxes, but you're stuck in Puerto Rico. I'm not stuck here. I like being here.
You embrace Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so it's not like a penalty. It's not like, it's the negative part of, yes, you save money on taxes, but you gotta suffer it in Puerto Rico. This is hardly a prison that I'm living in. It's very nice here. And so I think once people move here, they'll realize that. And a lot of people seem to have no problem relocating to Florida or relocating to Texas or Nevada, right? Because they don't have any state income tax. Well, if you're going to relocate anyway, if you're going to move your family to another school district, if you're going to leave, your local community where you have some friends or some relatives, you might as well just come to Puerto Rico. And then once you get here, you're going to make all sorts of friends. I mean, I probably have more friends. In fact, I know I have more friends in Puerto Rico than I do back in Connecticut. And you meet a lot of like-minded people because they all came here, for the same basic reasons that you did. So you'll find a lot of people that you have a lot in common with. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, a lot of motivated, energetic people, a lot of younger families too. I'm probably one of the older people in my 50s. I mean, there are a lot of people here in their 30s and 40s, young children just starting out, but they have businesses. And they're really motivated to grow those businesses and to really make something of themselves. But they realize that it's a lot easier to do it down here because you don't have the tax structure. And also you have a little bit more clarity as to your future tax rates. Because if you're living in the US right now, you have no idea how much higher your taxes might be in the future. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know where the capital gains tax rate might be. But you move to Puerto Rico and you get a contract and you know what your tax rate is until 2035. No one else knows that. So you have some certainty. Yes, maybe there's a way it can get screwed up with statehood or something like that, but that's kind of a remote possibility. But people that lives in the US, I mean, the next election is, who knows where the taxes are going to go. And especially when the debt is so big, when you have a national debt as large as ours, taxes have got to go up. So if you're in Puerto Rico, at least, you've removed that potential liability. So a lot of people are coming here, and they're good people.
And what's interesting that even though the law requires that you only have to be here 183 days, what I see with a lot of the people that actually move here, they actually spend more time in Puerto Rico, not because they have to, because they fell in love with the lifestyle in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was here last year like 200 and some odd days, 220 or something like that, I'm not sure. But, I have little kids in school, and so you're going to be here for the school year, number one, which is almost now you're 9 months. But yeah, most people that I know are not counting their days.
Sure.
And you do get 30 days of international travel too. So in theory, it's not even 183, because 30 of those days could be in Europe or Asia or wherever you happen to be traveling. And the other thing that does make it easier for people, and maybe they don't realize this, but you only have to be in Puerto Rico, just for a few minutes in a day for it to count. So if you do a lot of traveling for business, let's say you fly from San Juan on Monday morning and you go to Miami and you come back on Tuesday night, you haven't left. You're still here. If you leave on a Monday and come back on a Wednesday, even though you may spend 3 days away on business, you're only out of Puerto Rico 1 day. So it does make it easier knowing that you still get to count the morning you leave and the evening you return as days of presence in Puerto Rico.
Peter, it's been a real honor to talk to you today. Thanks for being here. To our audience, remember, you'll be listening more from Peter at the Puerto Rico Icon. It's going to be the 25th and 26th of February at the La Concha Hotel in Condado. Please go register at prinvestorsconference.com. Stay tuned to our next edition of Icon.